We have the important people here? Oh, right.
You like Congress stand up there and preach to an empty crowd.
And preach to an empty crowd? I ain't preaching, brother.
You know, there'll be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and nobody's sitting out there just filling the record full.
You know, turn the other cheek thing, and it's everybody in this country seems to believe.
Oh, yeah.
That you should just roll over like that, and I think Jesus Christ said use the law and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, let's see. I got some really interesting. Today, what we get to look at are some really interesting things that seem parallel. But remember, well, we'll get to that in a second. Let's just look at these words. Let's see. P-I-R-A. This is Z. It's pronounced DZ in Greek. O-N-T-E-S. Perizontes. Perizontes. Is that right about? Perizontes. Perizio. Perizio means basically to test. To test. And it comes from to pierce. And you could guess why it comes from to pierce, because like for example, if you're going to check vegetables or you're going to check bread or, well, check cake, right? How do you check cake or bread or whatever? You pierce it and you see if it's wet. So to pierce, to test. It's not a negative connotation at all. However, it is, look at the King James versions, and this isn't much different than the NIV. Essay, examine, go about, prove, tempt, or try. But it means to test, and that's the proper pronunciation. This one may make you think we are suddenly in John. Simeon, a sign. This is a sign. Generally a miraculous sign, but a sign. Simeon. And this, remember the 7 great Simeon in John. There are a gazillion in Mark, and that's kind of the big deal in Mark, is there are a lot. And sets up for a beautiful paradox. D-Z-U-M-E-S. Zume, from Zeo. This word means, this word is translated leaven, but it doesn't mean leaven at all, because it is only applied, zume is only applied for beer. So it's a fermentation process of beer, and not the fermentation process of bread. So a different word is used for yeast in bread. This means fermentation of beer. It does not mean leaven, but that's what it's translated as in the NIV and in the King James. Blepo, B-L-P-E-T-E, blepete, blepo is a primary verb. It means to look at. Unfortunately, this is translated, behold, beware, watch, lie. So, you know, this just means to look at. To look at. If I translate this with behold or beware, or especially beware, that's a whole lot different than to look at, don't you think? But anyway, we'll see. We'll see what we get. We're starting in chapter 8:1. And so, during those days, another polis, many ochlos, throng, gathered. Since they had nothing to fago, to eat, Jesus, proskelemoi, called to himself his disciples, his methides, his learners, and said, and lego, he made a logical argument. Okay, he's going to say, what's he going to say? They're hungry, and he made a logical argument. So we are looking at we're comparing and contrasting, right? A previous issue. Now, do you remember offhand, does anybody remember in the previous feeding, what was the main point of the Logos? Remember the Logos? The Logos? What was the Logos about in that section?
They sent them out to preach the word.
He did.
What was the response to the word?
The response to the word was part of the Logos, but ultimately, do you remember what that whole section was? The proof of what? Power over?
The God. Yeah.
Power over the gods. But yes, there was, and that's what's really cool about this. You know, we have overlapping logos to telos, right? There's overlapping logos to telos. Because part of that was Jesus had sent them out to basically, the word infiltrate is not a good word. You know, he wasn't doing NSA spying, but he was sending them out to be with the people, to bring the message to the people, to show them, you know, a lot of things. There's a lot going on in that. But the ultimate point of the feeding the 5,000 was basically to show the power of Jesus over the gods in food, you know, over the seas, that was a huge point. Now what is the logos to tell us that we're looking at? What's our overall theme of our logos to tell us right now? From last week and the week before, out of all of 7. Remember? What is clean? What is koine? Koine. What is koine? What is basically unclean and clean? And so, before the question was the power over the gods, now the question is similar, but it's what is clean. Now remember, just because the logos to telos, just because we reached a point where in English we'd say, oh, it's time for a conclusion. A Greek writer doesn't do that, right? Because these are continuing themes or ideas to the whole document. So once they're brought up, it's not like, you know, well, I hate to put it this way, but I told you the conclusion was of the talents. You know, the conclusion the pastor made of the talents was that therefore God owns everything, right? Well, if that's your conclusion, that's your telos, that means you have to apply that telos to what? Every single point within that document, right? You can't just suddenly say, well, it says this here and it says that there, right? That has to be a continuing theme. So therefore, a continuing theme throughout Mark is the power over the gods. And that doesn't diminish. But right now, the theme is, and that was brought out. It wasn't like it was a beginning theme. It was brought out in that section about what makes a man clean or unclean, right? What goes into a man doesn't make him unclean. It's what comes out of the man. And so that is a continuing theme. And so we saw what came out of the woman, right, the Greek woman, was a beautiful Lego. And we saw, that remind us, what came out of the man of unclean lips, right, of unkoinea lips was nothing. He couldn't make an argument. So Jesus made the argument for him. See? And we're going to see continuation of that idea, of that concept. Because you notice, we saw in one, Jesus asked and was provided a beautiful Lego. He didn't ask. And he provided the Lego. And now, Jesus makes a Lego. He says he's going to make a Lego. And the Lego he makes is, I have compassion. Literally, my bowels yearn. The word is I can't pronounce this. Splanchinosemai, my bowels yearn. It's a Greek saying, my bowels yearn for these people. They have already been with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I just want to note something here. You know, one of the reasons that some commentators may have complained about the simplicity of Mark, because instead of telling us in some kind of fancy Greek what Jesus thinks, right? What did he do? He showed us, he gave a very specific Greek about how Jesus feels, right? My bowels yearn. He didn't say, I feel bad, I feel la 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 la, right? Didn't get, my bowels yearn. Very simple, straightforward, to the point. Very specific. And then, you know, this sounds like the feeding of the 5,000. But guess what? Did Jesus say, I have compassion, my bowels yearn for? No. Did he say, I'm going to make a Lego? No. The people basically, the disciples brought it to his attention, right? Before. Send the people away because we don't have any food for them. In this case, Jesus is acting. Very interesting, isn't it? It's in this cleanliness section.
Because I thought too, I thought this is just a retelling of the same thing. But then later on in this chapter, he says, well, don't you remember when we fed the 5,000 or la-di-da? So it was definitely a different situation.
Well, we're going to do a comparison of the Greek words between the two. We could do this with Matthew too. You know, this goes back to what I said before. You know, in English, it sounds exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
In Greek, it's not at all the same.
Different words.
Totally different words. We'll see. You watch. This is very interesting. It says, if I send Apollo, if I set them free fully. And by the way, set them free fully. Do you remember Jesus used this exact same word just a second ago? This is a word that he used to the woman, the Greek woman. He set her free fully. He used this word, apolua. Apolua. He set her free fully. The same word's used about the deaf guy. He set him free fully. And Jesus says, if I set them free fully. He never used this term previous to this. And he never used this term about the previous people he fed. Okay? If I set them free fully, they'll go home nestus, not eating. The word isn't really hungry, it's not eating. They will collapse. They will ekluo. They will relax on the hodos, on the teen hodos. They will relax on teen hodos. You see, the concern is completely different. Did Jesus say anything about them, the other people going home and collapsing on the way, on the teen hodos? This is very interesting, because the question now in your mind should be, is this a different kind of crowd? I don't know. I can't tell from what it's saying. I'm trying to pick out from the Greek, what is Mark trying to show us or tell us about this circumstance? Because this is not anything like the previous one at all. The words are completely different. The approach is different. The reason is different. Everything is different. And Mark slips in. Didn't you see this? It's beautiful. He slips in. They will collapse on teen hodos, on the way. Because some of them have come a long distance. Literally, mak oruthan, from afar, from a long distance. That wasn't said of the people that came in the 5,000 at all. Totally different context. Completely different situation. Completely different words. And watch what it says. His disciples answered. But where in this remote place, literally in the Aramina, and remember the word that was used before? They didn't use the word remote place. It wasn't Aramina, right? It was the same word used before when it talked about John the Baptist being out in the wilderness, out in the lonely place. It wasn't Aramina, it was the lonesome place, right? Completely different word usage. Can anyone get enough artros, raised loaves, to feed, literally, choratezo, to fodder them? Okay, choratezo, remember, that was the word that was used by Jesus about the feeding of the children. What we're seeing is a parallel with the Greek woman. This is a direct parallel with the Greek woman. He's using words. Artos, remember? Artos, the raised loaves. I mean, that's the same word that was used also in the 5,000. But chorizo was not used. How many loaves do you have, Jesus asked. He interrogated them. Erato. 7, they replied. They said. Okay. He didn't tell them. It says he told them. He didn't tell them. Para agelo. Let's pull this apart. Para means near. Agelo means that's the angelion, the near message of the gods. So he didn't tell them. He brought them the near message of the gods to the crowd. This is totally different than the 5,000. The crowd to sit down. Okay, he told them to anapipto, to recline to eat on the gay. To recline to eat on the gay. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given Eucharisto, he gave Eucharisto. That's good blessing. He broke the bread and gave them to his disciples to set before parathemi, to set alongside the people. Now let's compare that to the feeding of the 5,000. The feeding of the 5,000, then Jesus directed, epitasso. He arranged them. In this one, he paraanglo. He brought the near message from the gods and told the crown. So he gave, before did he give a message to them? No. In this one, he gives a message. He talks to them about God. We don't know what the message was, but he told them. It probably was the gospel, what we would consider the gospel. And he says, it says, before he said, he had all the people sit down, anaklino, to recline to eat. Here he uses the word anapipto, literally to recline to eat. The word used in the 5,000 was anaklino. They were to recline, not to recline to eat, but to recline in symposia, to have a drinking party, to have a conference party, a symposia, where you speak about philosophical ideas. On the chloros, not on the gay, but on the chloros, on the grass, the green vegetation. Now, least you think this is a big deal. Okay, if I could use the word gay instead of 3 words, multiple words, to describe something, what would you do if you were Mark? I mean, you're paying by the word, right? If I could, I'd use gay. Well, why did he use gay in this case, but not in the other? Right? And yet, what does it say in the English? It says in the English, that they sat down on the, well, it says in the green grass, right? In the grass. But to us, sitting on the earth and sitting on the green grass is what? Same thing. But you notice, the words are completely different. But yet in the translation, you just have to sit down, right?
If you had livestock, it'd be a big difference.
You did. It says literally, so they reclined to eat down in rows, praesia, in rows of 50s and 100. Before, it says that was in the 5,000. So they were in rows of 50 and 50s and whatever. And it says, let's see, in the 4,000 here, the one that we have here, he set them down. They were going to eat on the ground. Doesn't say if they were any kind of order at all. And it says in 41, in 641, taking 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he made a logical, good logic, and broke. He katakleo, break down, divided the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples to parathemi, that's the same word, to place alongside before the people. And also, he merizeo, parted the 2 fish among them all. Look what it says here. He told them the near message of the gods, the crowd to sit down, to anapetito, to recline to eat, different word. On the gay, different word. He taken the 7 loaves and gave thanks, different word. He eucharisto, he didn't eulegeo, he eucharisto. He broke, he did not katakleo, he did not break down, he kleo, he broke the bread to them and gave it to his disciples to set parathemi alongside, same word there. And then in 7 it says, this is 8:7, they had a few puny, oligos, puny fish, literally a puny small fish as well. He gave thanks. This time he did the same. He said, eulogeo, good logos, for them, and said to the disciples to distribute parathemi, to place them alongside them. Now, you might say, well, okay, Mark is a good writer, and he's just using different words, right? Because he's a good writer. Well, what do you think? Why would you repeat? Now, in English, we know why we would repeat, right? Because we just want to give a record of history. But that isn't what the Greeks did. I mean, the Greeks are giving us good history, right? But this history isn't just about telling you what Jesus did. The point is to present a logos to telos, to show who he is. Right? That's the most important thing, is who he is and to prove it. So, very interesting here. And you remember at the end, the disciples certainly didn't want to act like servants, did they? Seems like their attitudes changed a little bit. Yes, sir.
I always thought something else that was interesting was the size of the street, because 5,000 back then is probably bigger than 95% of the towns that were there. So for him to attract that large of a group was a pretty phenomenal thing.
Yes, what you said is exactly true. As a matter of fact, if you remember, I think I've given the numbers to you before when we did Acts, that Jerusalem was normally about 20,000 people. And it soared to 1 million during the festivals, during the pilgrim feasts. So, 20,000, that's a big city. They're nothing like the size of ours. As a matter of fact, well, historically, cities generally are known as death traps. People die more in cities than they do in the urban areas, right? So you'd think, well, why gather, right? Well, I don't know. Cities may be a population control device. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, the Romans were also very scared during that time period. There's a lot of people coming in, and if they get upset or riot or anything like that, so they would shift in more guards.
That's, 5,000 people is bigger than most towns, bigger than any village, and almost as large as a large city, a city, and bigger than a legion, right? Not than a full legion, but bigger than, that's just a lot of folks, In any case, let's go on, let's see. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciple picked up 7 basketfuls. Spurus, the word used is different for the type of basket. The word used for the type of basket is different. Spurus, of broken pieces, of plasmia, different word. And they were left over, parasemia, the surplus. Totally different words. All different words. But yet, when we read it the same. Right? You go look at Matthew, it's the same, different words. What I'm trying to point out to you is, now, the focus of this is different. And Mark is trying to differentiate between the two. Because the one was the proof of the power of the gods. And look, this is a direct attack on Zeus and Demeter and Poseidon. But the question is about cleanliness. Now, do you remember where they were when he fed the 5,000? What were they beside?
Sea of Galilee.
Water. And what did you have to do before you ate? And what was the big point about what goes into a man or goes out of a man? The question was, why don't your disciples wash before you eat? And I pointed out that they were probably eating the leftover food from the feeding of the 5,000, right? So now we have a place where there appears, now Mark didn't tell us there's no water, but he didn't tell us there was water there.
Wilderness.
But the point he makes is, okay, Jesus is feeding them. So the impression here is, what is clean and what is unclean? Maybe the loaves, remember he's near the Decapolis here. So who might have made those loaves?
Unclean hands.
Before, who gave them the loaves? A little Jewish boy, maybe. Or at least that's our impression, right? But now they got loaves, they don't tell us where the loaves came from. But the Greeks in the crowd knew where the loaves came from, right? And the fishes. They came from the Greeks, probably. So the food's unclean.
He blessed it, though.
He Eucharisto. He didn't give a eulogos, right? He eulogos the fish. So maybe the fish were Jewish. Maybe they're kosher. I'm kind of making a joke, but you see the point here. He Eucharisto. He gave a blessing to the bread. So what we're talking about here is cleanliness. So what went into them didn't make them unclean. Right?
So what does it take to make them clean?
Now you talk about, you talk, I assure you that Mark was very cautious about writing this. I think that people of the time kind of got the point, because this is all about cleanliness. And so what would be your first question if you were a Pharisee about feeding this crowd? Where's the water? Right? You got to wash. That was their first question to the disciples. Right? There's no water. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of also implied by what they're sitting on. If there's green grass, there's probably a water source nearby. If they're just sitting on the ground, it might be just somewhere out in the wilderness.
For all we know.
Very good point. I think that's exactly right. And see, Mark is trying to tell us, and Mark isn't trying to be secret about it, right? He assumes that you are following the Logos, right? This isn't, you see what we want to do? I always point this out. I'm sorry, I have to repeat myself all the time. But we want to take these little stories, right, out and say, well, here's a story about Jesus feeding 4,000. And here's a story about Jesus feeding 5,000. Well, that's not what's important in the context. The important thing is, what is the Logos to tell us, right? And the Logos to tell us is obvious about cleanliness. So we're gaining understanding because we're not looking at them as just pieces of stories, right? Events, but rather a focused point. And every word that's different has a meaning. Jesus is blessing the food. Why? Well, maybe it was made by the Greeks. Jesus says they sit on the gay, or Mark writes they sit on the gay, but not the green grass. In one case, we know they're by the lake, the Sea of Galilee, right? Big lake. In the other case, we have no idea where they are. Let's see if there's anything more in here. And then it says, about 4,000 men were present, and having sent, fully freed them, sent them away. Let's see, I have a note here. It says about, yeah. The same word was used before about the Greek woman. So, again, the point is cleanliness. But look at the parallels to the Greek mother who asked, remember, about the puppies? Here's a great question for you. Is Jesus given pieces to the puppies? Is he given the bits of psalm to the puppies? Are these Greeks? Are there Greeks in the crowd? I don't know. It doesn't tell us. It just tells us where they are, which, if you look at your chart here, they're near the Decapolis. Look where the Decapolis is. Right? The 10 cities is Greek cities, right? They're Greek cities. I don't know. I think there's a huge pretext in here. Did Jesus cast crumbs to the puppies, or did he feed the teknon, the children of value, or both?
How far would people normally travel to follow Jesus? Okay.
These guys, it says, traveled from a long ways. But you notice what it said, some of them traveled from a long ways. So I'm guessing that some of them were Jews from the upper part of the Sea of Galilee, and some were Greeks. But do you see this? That most likely Jesus is, just before this, we got the woman, right? And it says, even the puppies eat from the crumbs. And Jesus just made crumbs for the puppies, right? He's not just feeding the teknon, the children of value. He's feeding the Greeks as well. Now, you notice why would Mark not say that directly? Why would he say it indirectly to us?
Presumably they knew it. It's obvious to them.
Well, remember what happened to old Peter and Cornelius. Peter lied, and Cornelius almost died. Cornelius, remember? Peter went to Cornelius in Acts, and he said, by the law, I am not allowed to eat with you. And that's a lie, because the Talmud does say that. But guess what doesn't? The Torah does not say that at all. So in this case, if it said that Jesus was using Greek food and feeding Greeks, right?
It's also picking up pieces of bread that were crumbs rather than pieces.
And these are basically about cleanliness. So what did Jesus just do? He gave us a beautiful impression. He gave us a tell-us about cleanliness, right? And it's really interesting that this plays out directly after. Because, like I said, you can't take these out of context. You can't just pull them out. They're not little stories to pull out vignettes. They are all tied to one another in a direct context. And also I want to point out that when an author, especially in the past, uses the same words to describe another circumstance, what do you think he's trying to do? He's trying to develop a parallelism between the two. So the fact that the words used by Mark to describe the woman that was a Greek woman and to describe this crowd are direct indicators to us. You know, we call them literary indicators, right? But that's the way people wrote in those days. Today, I try to write my books that way. I'm not sure everybody else does, but you know, that's one of the ways that you write very cohesive, powerful pieces of literature. At least we used to think that way. In 10, so he got into a boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmantia. Now, why Dalmantia is very important, and I got right here for you, I marked it, because this is possibly the center of the school of the Galilee. This is possibly the center of the school of the Galilee. There are 4 Pharisaic schools. The 4 Pharisaic schools are the school of the Galilee, the school of Jerusalem, the school of Babylon, and the school of Alexandria. The 2 most powerful schools at this time are the school of the Galilee and the school of Jerusalem. And they are known for their differences. As a matter of fact, when we eventually get Jesus going to Jerusalem, we're going to see the first thing the Pharisees want to know is, what do you think about the basic ideas of the school? And the big fight, the biggest fight in the school of Galilee, in the school of Jerusalem at this time, was about marriage. Can a man divorce his wife for any reason? And I believe it was the school of the Galilee that said yes, and the school of Jerusalem said no. You know, these things fade into obscurity in time, right? And Jesus walloped them anyway. What was the other one? There was another one that was really important at that time. There was a couple of very important questions. When we see them, I'll mark them. But they're the first things they asked Jesus, you know? And you just wonder, as God, Jesus just probably want to slap him, right? Just want to slap him. You know, he's like, you know, I gave you 2,000 pages, and what have you done, right? You made another 5,000 pages of made-up stuff, and now you're playing some kind of game here, right?
Obamacare.
Yeah, that's another problem. But look, he got into
word association.
Word association. He got into a boat with his disciples, went to the region of Dalmantia, and this is Jewish, deep Jewish land, possibly the school of the Galilee. The Pharisees came, exochromai, issued out of the town. Okay, we are not sure where the center of the school of Galilee is, but where else would you have a whole bunch of Pharisees to issue out of the town, right? The school of the Galilee. And began to question, syzeteo, to investigate jointly. There's no negatives in here. To test, to perizeo him, to test him, that's the word. And they sought from him a semeion, a supernatural sign from Aranos. All right. Guys, there's an irony here. What is the irony in this? Got to tell me. Tell me the irony. They want a sign. What has Jesus been doing from the very beginning of Mark? From the beginning of Mark, he's been given signs, and not only given signs, but the Pharisees have come to him and seen him, right? They know he's been given signs. Look, this is a setup. We believe, right? We're sitting here and we're going, okay, what we should be going is, what is wrong with these people? What do we think? We think, oh, yeah, a sign. Give him a sign, right? Just give him a sign, right?
Better get to it on Sunday.
Why would the sign trap him? I don't quite understand. if he gave the sign, and they said they were out to trap him, so they asked. How is that trapping?
Well, see, you're thinking the wrong way.
Okay.
The Greek would think, okay, look, Jesus has done a gazillion signs and these guys know about it. So that means they're dumber than a bag of rocks. It means they're stupid. Okay? You know, Jesus calls the disciples stupid. He has choice words for these guys. Because literally, a Greek audience would say, these guys are stupid. Right? See, that's what I'm saying. We think wrong about it. Our thought is, okay, they're legitimately looking for a sign. Well, maybe they are, but they're dumber than bricks. Because Jesus has been doing sign after sign. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know, a modern miracle worker. You know, if we saw such a thing, and I think there are modern miracle workers. I think miracles do really happen. But, you know, oh, you know, it wasn't a miracle. It was just science. It wasn't a miracle. Well, it just, right? The world is empirical. That's all it is. There's nothing else except empiricism. Well, that's easy to disprove. What are you thinking right now? And will you really tell me? You know, it's just a silliness. And I think the Greeks, more than anyone, cut through stupidity and silliness. I mean, that's their culture, right? That's why they killed Socrates, right? Because he asked questions they were uncomfortable answering. You know, why do we hate Jesus? We really do. We hate Jesus because he asked questions that we don't want to answer, right? It's like your mom and dad. You love your mom and dad, but you hate them because they asked you, well, did you break that? Did you break that? And you know they know you did, right? See? You know? Did you take that? Right? Where did that $1.50 go that I had on the table? You know, I'm just saying. You know, somebody snuck in with wearing a ninja mask and took it, right? You know, when your parents, that's why I love the word parakleo. Parakleo, you know, calling near, and Mark used it over and over again. Paul used it in better context, I believe. But, you know, Mark is trying to tell us something, you know. And Paul is definitely trying to call us something because parakleo is God calling, right? God calling to comfort or to punish at the same time. Because sometimes your mother gives you a hug and smacks your bottom at the same time, right? Have you been in that circumstance? I have. Never? Never? Your mother didn't love you enough. They're looking for a sign, and Jesus hasn't stopped giving signs. This is what we call Greek irony. This is beautiful Greek irony. And look what Jesus does. He sighed deeply. Literally, anastaseno. He intensely sighed. Do you see why he intensely sighed? I've been giving you signs, yeah, forever.
Facepalm.
Yeah, what would you say?
Facepalm.
Boom! Yeah, exactly. Facepalm. Right? Exactly. You know, he sighed deeply and he legoed. He made a logical argument. Why does this generation, Genea, ask for a semeon, a supernatural indication? And here is a unbelievable, in my opinion, mistranslation. In your Bible, in the King James, it says, I tell you the truth. No sign will be given to it. That is not what it says in the Greek. It says, I tell you that signs will be given. Jesus affirms that I will give signs. I will give signs. I do not believe there's an intended negation in this sentence. I believe that it's straightforward Greek, and I think we added this culturally. We added it culturally because we didn't understand. If you don't understand the point of the irony here, you're not going to get the point that Jesus is making. In other words, Jesus is saying, I gave you signs. I'm giving you signs. I'm going to continue to give you signs. It's not that I'm not going to give you signs. It's that they are given. And matter of fact, it goes on that what did he do? See, in our mind, if Jesus says, I'm going to give you signs, right? The Greek irony is what? you're an idiot, right? Because then it says in 13, then he left, got back in the boat, and crossed the other side. Right? He said, I'm going to give you a sign. And then he crossed the other side. Now, watch what he does. This is again the Logos to tell us. And remember, we're still talking about cleanliness and uncleanliness. We're still talking about cleanliness and uncleanliness. As a matter of fact, let's see, I have some notes here. Let's see. The sign he's giving them is he went directly across from Dalmaneth. And if you go across from Dalmaneth, where are you going? You're going to the land of the Greeks. Because this is where we were before, right? Gennesaret on the other side, right? And that's a Greek place where there are temples and a Greek cemetery. So Jesus is going back across. This is the sign. Do you get this? Jesus said, I'm going to give you a sign, and he just went to the Greeks. He's going to the puppies. It's not to say he's not still ministering to the Jews, right? But he's given them a sign. And look what the sign is. Here's interesting. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for 1/2 of a loaf that they had with them in the boat. And where do you think that 1/2 of a loaf came from? The feeding of the 4,000, right? So, okay, you might ask yourself the question, why did they neglect to bring bread? Jesus is going to make it, right? Right? This is a joke about the miracles, so the reader won't miss the point of the previous encounter. Mark is reminding you about feeding of the 4,000 and 5,000. But look what Jesus says. He says, blepo, look at. Blepo, not be careful, look at, look at, look at. Look at, not warn. It's not warn. It's diastelemai. I should have given these words as words a day. It says, he set apart an argument for them. It doesn't say he warned them. It says he set apart an argument for them. He says, stare at, not watch out for. Look at, stare at, horeo, the ferment of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Okay? It is a gross mistranslation. It does not say watch out for the yeast. It doesn't say look out for the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. That's not what it says. It says, look at the ferment of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Why would he want them to look at the ferment, the action in beer, by the way, of the Pharisees and Herod? What does he want them to do?
Understand the similarities between the two of them, or commonality of their thoughts?
Who controls the world right now in this area?
Romans.
No. Herod is the king. The Pharisees control the religious structure. The Pharisees teach. Herod rules. What would you want to look at from Jesus' standpoint about these guys? How do the Pharisees control the religious aspects of the people? Through the synagogues and teaching. How does Herod control the people? Basically through force, right? And through political action. What is he telling them to do? Learn from them. This isn't a negative connotation. This isn't to beware of it. Why would you beware of it? They just went to Dalmatia, which is probably the center of the school of the Galileo. What would Jesus' answer be to the disciples to make in Galilee? What did he tell them to make in Galilee? A school of Jesus, right? Make me a school of Jesus. Like the Pharisees had. The Pharisees teach the people in the synagogues, right? Make me a political structure like Herod. It doesn't mean make a dictatorial structure. What he means is you want to become the political control in that area, right? You want to control. You want to own the minds and hearts of the people. How do you do that? You teach. You want to own the minds and hearts of the government. What do? You learn. You see, this is what is the biggest problem with the Greek concepts to the Hebrews? They have been taught all the time to reject them, right? Jesus is telling them to do something that's very Greek. Learn. Learn from your enemies. Learn from those who oppose you to do powerful things in the world. So we'll continue with this. But I just wanted you to know there is a terrible mistranslation here, a couple of mistranslations, which don't necessarily hurt, but they certainly hide what the point that Jesus is trying to make, I believe, especially within the context of the Logos. Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray that you continue to look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.